That night, the house that should have felt safe carried a cold, metallic tang in the air, as if something invisible had fallen between them and was lying there, waiting to be named. It wasn't footsteps or a door that made Bill tense. It was the sensation of his own body betraying him, a throat gone dry and raw, a chest weighed down, a heartbeat that missed once and then bolted as if trying to escape. The teacup was still warm. The dark surface reflected the soft yellow light, beautiful in a way that suddenly felt wrong. In that instant, Bill understood something that raised goose flesh on his skin. Some traps don't snap shut with a sharp crack. They close with gentleness, with routine, with trust poured drop by drop like tea until poison becomes part of everyday life. And if there truly was poison, then the person who placed it didn't just want him dead. They wanted him dead inside the humiliation of having willingly offered his neck to the noose. When Madison told him there were abnormal toxins in his drink, the vague unease that had been shadowing him took on a clear shape, sharp-edged as a blade. Bill had no choice but to follow the fracture lines in the picture of happiness he had tried to frame, because even silence could be a form of complicity now. Madison hadn't stumbled onto the truth through cheap luck. She noticed the smallest changes in Bill's body, dizzy spells that came and went like ghosts, exhaustion that lingered no matter what he did, symptoms that routine tests kept dodging. The instincts of a medical professional refused an easy answer, and the private guilt of watching someone be slowly strangled by something unseen made her dig deeper. When she found traces of toxicity in the water Bill drank most often, she realized she had brushed against a crime designed not to explode, but to erode. She also understood that timing mattered. If she spoke too soon, Bill would react in the most dangerous way, not by seeking justice, but by chasing an outlet for rage and shame. Yet if she stayed quiet, she would become the person who watched a death get packaged as an accident. So she told him enough to wake him up, but not so much that she stole his agency. She handed him the truth like a flame, knowing that the same flame could scorch everything around him. Bill reacted exactly as she feared. He didn't collapse. He didn't panic at the prospect of dying. He ignited furious not at mortality, but at the idea that someone had turned him into prey inside his own home. That anger wasn't merely emotion. It was survival instinct fused with the pride of a man accustomed to control. He hated feeling led. He hated the thought that someone had treated his body like an asset to be seized. Most of all, he hated that it had been disguised as love. What hurt most wasn't the poison itself, but the question it dragged behind it. How many tender moments had been tactics? How many soft words had been padding for something murderous to happen without friction? And then Bill did the thing that both disgusted him and fed his hunger for certainty. He rebuilt his daily routine as if nothing had changed, letting the trap reveal its own mechanisms. He began investigating Hayley in silence, not with petty jealousy, but with the cold focus of someone who had realized he might be sharing a roof with the person who wanted him dead. Every time Hayley stepped out with a vague excuse, every message she deleted too fast, every call she took and turned away from, became a piece of evidence. Bill stopped looking at her as the woman he loved. He forced himself to look at her as a file, a pattern, a map that might lead to the place where he could be buried alive without anyone hearing him scream. Yet the investigation carved open a deeper war inside Bill. Part of him wanted this to be a misunderstanding. Another part wanted proof, so sharp it could slice through any excuse. Some nights, he watched Hayley sleep, her face peaceful enough to knock the wind out of him, and his fury briefly dissolved into something worse. The bleak, humiliating sadness of a man realizing his love might have been merchandise. He asked himself whether he had created enemies by living too hard, whether he had made it reasonable in someone's mind to kill him. Then he laughed bitterly at the thought, because no matter what he had done in the past, poisoning someone was still a choice. The responsibility belonged to the hand that reached for the toxin. Bill refused to become a man who forgave the destruction of his life simply because he was afraid to admit he'd been fooled. As the pieces tightened into a picture, the reality grew clearer than anything he dared imagine. Hayley hadn't approached him on impulse. She'd approached him as a plan. She knew how to slip into his world at the right moment, how to soften him with half-told wounds, how to make him feel like a savior. The terrifying part was that Bill had liked that role. He had let himself believe he could purchase peace through devotion, that having someone like Hayley at his side proved he was still capable of being truly loved. Now that the truth was surfacing, Bill didn't only see betrayal, he saw his own betrayal of his instincts. He had ignored the signs because he wanted this story to be real, wanted it to transform him into something better. The truth struck like a slap. Not every love story is redemption. Sometimes it's simply the method. Someone chooses to kill you without needing a gun. The confrontation came faster than Bill expected, as if anger had chosen its own hour to detonate. In the kitchen, the place where Hayley made tea like a private ritual, Bill stared at the kettle and the cup the way a man studies the scene of a crime. He couldn't keep acting. When Hayley set the cup down, Bill heard his heart slam against his ribs, not only with rage, but with a grief he refused to name. He grabbed her by the collar, yanking her close enough to catch the flicker of terror in her eyes, and the question erupted like a verdict. What did you put in my tea? That question wasn't just about identifying a chemical. It demanded the name of the truth, the name of the motive, the name of every day he had been lulled into offering his throat. Hayley froze for a heartbeat, as if her mind couldn't yet accept that the curtain had fallen. Then survival woke up in her. She fought to keep her face composed, to wear the mask of a woman falsely accused, because she understood Bill's nature. He might forgive tears, but he would never forgive being treated like a fool. She tried to step back, but Bill's grip became a lock. In that moment, Hayley faced her real nightmare. Bill hadn't only discovered something, he had investigated. That meant he might already be holding enough to destroy her, enough to turn her from a tragic, misunderstood woman into a murderer in the eyes of everyone who mattered. Inside Hayley, fear and hatred collided like live wires. She was terrified of being accused, terrified of losing everything she had built step by calculated step. Yet she also hated Bill. In her own warped way hated him for making her believe that survival required predation. Yes, she had approached him with purpose, but the closer she got, the more she realized he wasn't just a wealthy man. He was a machine of power that could grind anyone into silence. If she walked away with nothing, she would be swallowed by the consequences of her first choice, by whatever forces stood behind her, by the weight of her own past. If she stayed, she would live under his control forever. Either way, there was no clean exit. That realization made her feel monstrous, and it also made her feel trapped, cornered by a life that had taught her mercy was a luxury. She had entered this game to control her fate, and the game had turned her into someone with no way back. Bill saw her hesitation, and his fury sharpened. He wasn't only angry about poison. He was enraged by the way Hayley's eyes suggested her crime could be packaged as a difficult choice. Bill refused a story of necessity. In his mind, certain lines existed for a reason, and Hayley had crossed the worst one. Yet another part of him unwanted, stubborn, was dragged back to memory. The days he believed Hayley was a refuge, the moments she made him feel like he was more than a name attached to power. That inner split made Bill despise himself. He didn't want his heart to have a vote in something that demanded logic, but his heart kept speaking, and that made his rage even more violent, because he hated that he could still be weak. Madison, though absent from the kitchen, hovered in Bill's thoughts like a shadow. She had saved him from the blade, but she had also opened the door to a larger tragedy, the necessity of facing what the person he trusted truly was. Bill wrestled with two roads, both costly. He could turn everything over to the law, let the world call it justice, and risk admitting publicly that he'd been poisoned in his own home, that he had been blind. Or he could handle it privately, punish Hayley in a way that ensured she could never return, and in doing so, become the kind of man who stands above the law and cannot pretend to be capable of love anymore. Both choices demanded a sacrifice, but the fact remained. Hayley had tried to kill him, and Hayley, branded by his accusation, trapped under his grip and his gaze, couldn't rely on begging or denial forever. Cornered people don't just collapse. Sometimes they attack. Her mind raced through outcomes. If Bill went to the police, she would lose everything. If Bill forgave her, she would live under suspicion and control. If Bill sought revenge, she would be erased without anyone stepping in to save her. That fear could metastasize into her most dangerous, most negative impulse, trying to flip the story, painting Bill as violent, baiting him into losing control for a single second so she could claim victimhood, escape the sentence hanging over her head. But the line between self-defense and further crime was thin as a hair, and Hayley sensed that if she took one wrong step, she would no longer be seen as human at all. In that kitchen, a loss had already happened. Even if no one had died, trust died first, love died first. A version of Bill died first, the version that believed forgiveness could make him better. Now he was left with rage, and the hardest question of all. Could love ever be enough to forgive an attempted murder? Or was love simply the excuse that would allow the betrayer to survive long enough to strike again? And if he forgave her, would he be signing his own death warrants not with poison, but with self-deception? Hayley looked at Bill and realized his eyes weren't only furious, they were calling into a decision. She felt herself at the edge of a cliff, with Bill holding the power to push or pull. And Bill, caught in his own storm, understood the most terrifying thing wasn't what Hayley had put in the tea, it was the possibility that part of him still wanted to believe she had a reason, still wanted to believe their love hadn't been entirely counterfeit. That part hurt him more than any toxin ever could. Everything hovered at the brink of a choice that could not be undone. Bill would either forgive and become a prisoner of doubt, or demand payment and drag Hayley down with him, regardless of the fallout, regardless of the wounds it reopened in himself. And Hayley, forced against the wall, would either break under despair or strike back with something even more shocking, a secret so sharp it would make Bill realize the poison in his tea was only the surface of a much darker plan, one that might not be aimed at Bill alone, but at everything he believed he controlled.